I don't do funerals. Those words were spoken to me by a man who I was dating, who I thought I was going to marry after a friend of ours died by suicide. In my brain, I wanted to say, well, no one wants to do a funeral. You do it to pay respect to the dead and support the living. But instead, what came out of my mouth was, well, what if I died while we're still together? Would you go to my funeral? Because that's really a normal question to ask someone when you're dating them, right? Well, I'm not an actress, but his response sounded something like this, and wait for it because it's subtle. I was like, I mean, is that a yes or a no or a maybe or worse yet, you don't know? Dude, just lie. It's probably not gonna work out, I'll never know. But I truthfully, I understood why he felt that way about funerals and going to funeral homes, because it really wasn't about the funeral itself. It was about having to come face to face with someone who is grieving and who is in pain, and coming up with the right words to the question, what do I say? I've spent over 20 years of my life as a professional interviewer and television broadcaster. I've interviewed so many parents who have lost children and people who have gone through other traumatic life situations like survivors of suicide and survivors of domestic violence, and talked to countless psychologists on how to deal with grief, loss, pain, depression, and how to help someone when they're struggling. But nothing teaches you for that moment, that exact moment when you come face to face with someone who is struggling and in pain and knowing what to say. I want to share a story with you that became my compass to walk into uncomfortable conversations to forge human connection rather than avoid them altogether because I didn't know what to say. It was an April night in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was going to see about a guy. I looked casually cute in my yoga pants and white zip-up sweatshirt to show off my spring break tan. I wanted to put enough effort into myself to look cute, but not too much because we were just gonna eat pizza and watch Netflix. So I'm in the car, on the drive, the sunroof is open, fresh air blowing in. I had Tennessee whiskey on the radio, and I'm singing along thinking like I could totally do a great duet with Chris Stapleton right now, right? Because we all think we sound so good in the car. So while I'm driving and I get a little closer to my destination and the guy, I thought, so do I put on lip gloss? Because I want my lips to look good. And I kind of want him to kiss me, but if he kisses me with lip gloss, like that could be kind of messy, so what do I do? The point is, like, I'm feeling cute and free and excited and full of life and energy. So I get to my destination, park my car, and my phone beeps. It was a text message, and it was from my sister, Kathleen. And suddenly my heart started to beat in a different way, the kind where it feels like it almost stops. Her text message read, Raghu Dacha died. I can't breathe. My heart feels broken. Raghu was a boy who lived in the neighborhood we grew up in. And there were many children in our neighborhood. We were quite a diverse group and an age range as well. Raghu was the youngest in this group. He just had this smile that would light up a room. And if I could use one word to describe this boy, it would be joyful. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things you can be as a human being, to be joyful. I called my sister when I got her text message and did my best to console her through her heavy sobs and tears. And then I got off the phone and I did what we always do when we hear something tragic, especially when a parent loses a child. How awful it must be for their parents and their family. what pain it must be. You feel so awful. And I knew this boy. I knew him my entire life. He was only 35 years old when he died. He was the baby of our group. He was the little boy who wasn't quite as athletic as everyone else, but when we would run down the street, he was lagging behind everybody else, but had this smile on his face that was like, I'm coming, wait for me. And he had kind of this like crooked little run, but God, he was a sweetheart. So, how awful for his parents, right? And so I'm thinking about that, but that's where my thoughts stayed, in my mind and in my own space. I did write a thoughtful note and drop it in the mail and send it to his parents, but I didn't go to the funeral. Honestly, I don't even remember getting details about it. So I just felt bad and felt awful, but that's where it stayed. A week passed, another week, a couple more months. Life goes on, right? Well, one summer night after Raghu had passed away, I was taking a walk in the neighborhood where I grew up. The neighborhood that held memories of my time with all the kids there and Raghu. Now, when I'm taking a walk, I'm just in my own zone. I'm either listening to Oprah's Super Soul Conversations podcast, a book on Audible, or something fantastic on my playlist. And on this particular night, I'm pretty sure I was listening to Eminem singing Lose Yourself, which meant I was really serious. Like, that's when I'm like in my own tunnel vision. And as I was losing myself in the music and in the moment, I came to a sudden stop. I saw something ahead that I wanted to avoid. That something was a someone. And you know, we've all been there, right? Where you are in a room and you see someone, they haven't seen you, but you don't really want to see them, and you're thinking like, how do I get out of this? So that's what I was thinking. I'm like, oh, they have not seen me yet. I could just cross the street. I'll just cross the street, they'll never notice. But that wasn't the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to take 50 steps forward and look into the eyes of someone who I'd known for most of my life. That person was Raghu's father, and I had not seen the boy's parents since his passing. And all I felt was fear. Fear of not knowing what to say, guilt that I hadn't addressed the boy's passing sooner in person, fear of the emotions that would come out of my mouth and stream from my eyes, and fear that the boy's father would have the same emotions and I wouldn't respond the right way. I felt guilt and fear. I read something somewhere once that said, sometimes the fear won't go away, so you'll just have to do it afraid. I needed to keep moving forward, and I had to do it afraid. I turned off my music, removed my AirPods, got to the end of the driveway. Raghu's father and I made eye contact. And my words were simple. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. We all loved Raghu. I looked him in the face, we embraced. He started crying, I started crying. He told me about his son's death and what it was like when he found out that he only had days to live. And sometimes his words were steady, and sometimes he fought to speak. But through every painful moment, I stood there with him and never looked away. And then he said something that sticks with me every time I'm faced with that moment of whether or not to walk into an uncomfortable conversation to forge human connection or avoid it. He said, many of my colleagues at work don't say anything to me at all, and they know I lost my son. And this was a comment he made without judgment. He said, I'm in pain, but they don't have to be afraid of me. I know it's hard for people, but they don't have to avoid me. I think what happens for most of us in these situations is, one, we want to have the right thing to say. We want to have the right words. And two, we want to take away the pain. But here's the thing. There are no right words, and you can't take away the pain. But you can show compassion. You can listen. You can sit through painful tears. I read something that I thought was interesting, and I want you to know I'm not a researcher. Science and statistics classes were not my strengths in school. I'm a storyteller, and I'm someone who practices soulful connections. But a study done by a group of Stanford researchers was something that I did understand because the results were very clear. This group of researchers found that after just 7 minutes of practicing a loving kindness meditation, participants increased their social connection after just 1 attempt. Is compassion innate in us? My father would say, "Your mother is really good at it, I'm not very good." My mom and dad are up in the front. He's laughing. He knows it's true. And he's not wrong. My mother is an angel when it comes to showing compassion, especially in difficult situations. Charles Darwin would say that compassion is an innate instinct that we all share, and it's the key to human evolution. And so my father, who claims to be a bit shaky in the compassion department, told me a story that I thought was one of the most beautiful acts of compassion that I'd ever heard. And I think it's a moment worth sharing. Just over a year ago, I lost a special friend. His name was Paul. He was a father, a husband, a brother, a friend to many, and a son. In fact, he was the sun. He lit up a room every time he walked into it. And he was the kind of person that made your life better just by being in it, even if it was just for a moment. He was just like the total package of a human being: smart, kind, caring, successful, gorgeous on the inside and out. But what he loved most about his life was being a daddy to his twin baby girls. One summer day, Paul was driving with his family to the most magical place on earth, Disney World. You can imagine that car ride, right? 2 4-year-old little girls in the back going to meet the Disney princesses for the first time, and Mickey and Minnie. On the drive to Disney, Paul suffered a massive heart attack behind the wheel of the car and died instantly. What do you say? What the hell do you say? He was 38, a young man, his whole future ahead of him, little girls who won't remember them when they get older. Well, we know Paul and his family well because my parents live down in Florida. And they live in a condo, and Paul's parents live in that same condo, and they've been friends for well over a decade now, and we consider them to be like family. I was visiting my parents in Florida, and I was in the kitchen, and I noticed some exceptional bottles of wine, and I'm Italian, and I wanted to dig into them. And my dad said, "Those are for me and Al." And Al is Paul's father. He said, I called Al up and I said, "I want to have a day with you. I bought some wine. We're going to toast Paul. And then I want you to tell me everything about your son. The whole story, from the beginning, from the moment he was born." One thing I know about parents who lose children is that they do not want anyone to forget them. They want to keep their memory alive. So I would say that was a really beautiful act of compassion from somebody who wasn't sure if they could quite get it right. What is human connection through uncomfortable conversations? It's choosing to show up and sit with another person when your friend is diagnosed with cancer and she doesn't want to die. When your parents get the parenting thing wrong one day and it makes you not like them, but you love them, and talking through it is the only way to make things right again. When a colleague or a friend loses their job or their business and you're uncertain of how to approach the shame they may feel. When your friend's son dies in a horrific accident and the pain is unbearable. When a woman you know has been having fertility issues and then she finally gets pregnant and suffers a miscarriage. When your child comes to you and says, I'm gay, and I've been afraid to tell you because I still want you to love me. When, and this will happen to all of us, you have to say, I was wrong. I know I hurt you. Can you forgive me? So back to that question that will still creep up in all of us every time these moments happen. What do I say? I don't know what to say. This is what you can do. Hold space with that person. Look them in the eye and say, I don't know what to say. I'm here for you. I care about you. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. And if you freeze when that moment comes, and you may, go into it afraid. You know, I'll tell you, it was just a week ago. I went to a funeral home. A friend of mine's son passed away. And it was under tragic circumstances. Of course, it always would be, right, when someone loses a child. And I was giving this talk, and I'm standing in line waiting to get closer, and every inch I thought, what am I gonna say? I don't know what to say. I'm doing a TED Talk on this. I'm gonna talk to people about this, and I'm freezing. I don't know what to say. And there I was standing in front of my friend, and all I could think to say was, I don't have the right words. We hugged each other, and he whispered into my ear, but you have a good heart. That's all we need to do. Show up with a good heart. Because sometimes it's our presence alone that speaks volumes. Now, we're all gonna go about our lives. We'll leave here today. And you may forget a lot of what I said, but if you only remember one thing, remember this. Act. Interact with someone who is struggling, who is in pain, who is grieving, who's gone through trauma or some kind of loss or depression. When you step into that moment, that uncomfortable moment, and you forge human connection, you offer one of your greatest gifts, the gift of compassion through your humanity. Thank you.